Okay, so I want you to picture a scenario. It's become a classic in neurology lectures.
Oh, yeah, I think I know the one.
A man climbs a tower, starts shooting at people. It's just a horrific, completely senseless tragedy. And then later, during the autopsy, the coroner finds something.
A massive tumor.
A massive tumor, pressing right against his amygdala.
Mm.
The part of the brain that handles fear and aggression.
And this is the Charles Whitman case. And almost immediately, the whole public narrative just shifts.
Completely.
We stop seeing him as a monster, and he becomes, well, a victim of his own biology, like a mechanical failure, a car with cut brakes.
We can separate the person from the tumor. But here's the question, and this is really what kicks off our whole deep dive today. Imagine that same man commits the exact same crime. But this time, no tumor. Instead, he just has a specific set of genes that wires his brain for really high impulsivity and low empathy.
And suddenly all that sympathy just evaporates.
Gone. He's just a bad person.
It's a huge contradiction, isn't it? I mean, if the tumor is biology he can't control, and the genes are biology he can't control, why is one a tragedy and the other a moral failing?
That is the very uncomfortable question we're wrestling with today. We're exploring a really heavy conversation between the neuroscientist Andrew Huberman and Dr. Kathryn Paige Harden, who's a geneticist at UT Austin.
And it's all based around her book, Original Sin, which just fundamentally challenges how we think about agency and behavior and even justice.
And we should probably clarify the mission right at the top. We are not looking for, like, a gene for murder.
Because that doesn't exist.
Right.
It's so much more nuanced. We're looking at the interplay between our DNA and our environment. We're going to explore how biology kind of sets the stage, how it influences risk-taking and why we get a literal chemical high from seeing people punished.
We've got three main pillars to get through. First, we'll look at what they call the adolescent pressure cooker, so puberty, biological aging.
Then we'll tackle the whole bad seed myth and something called the entrepreneur paradox.
And finally, we're going to dissect the cruelty currency, the actual science behind why we seem to love to blame.
So let's start with that pressure cooker. Harden focuses her research on a really specific window, ages 10 to 25.
Which, yeah, that feels right. That's when everything seems to go off the rails for a lot of people.
It is the critical window. Harden says this is when individual differences canalize.
Canalize.
Yeah, think of it like a river flowing over soft earth. In childhood, the water can kind of move around. But during adolescence, that river cuts a deep channel. And once it's cut, it's way harder to change the river's course.
Okay, so that's why this is the peak time for mental illness, addiction, antisocial behavior?
Exactly. And the driving force behind it is puberty. But the conversation makes this really interesting distinction that I hadn't really thought about before.
That's it.
It's not just about when puberty starts, it's about the pace. They separate timing from tempo.
And that's crucial because the risks are different for boys and girls.
Totally different. For girls, the data is really clear that timing is the primary risk factor.
Meaning starting early is the danger zone.
Yes. Hitting puberty early as a girl, we're talking 9, 10, 11 years old, is correlated with just a cascade of negative outcomes. Higher rates of depression, anxiety, physical health problems later on.
It's that social precocity, right?
Yeah.
You look like a woman before you have the cognitive tools to deal with being treated like one.
Precisely. But for boys, the script just flips. It's not about when it starts.
It's the tempo.
It's the velocity. The biggest risk factor for boys is going through puberty, like overnight.
Oh, we all knew that kid in middle school.
Yeah.
One summer he's short, and then he comes back in September 6 inches taller with a beard.
And that rapid change is biologically jarring. His testosterone is spiking, his muscles are growing, but his prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO, the judgment part, it's on a much slower development track.
There's a mismatch.
A huge mismatch. He looks like a man, everyone treats him like a man, but his internal braking system is still, under construction. And that's where you see the spike in accidental deaths, risky behaviors.
Speaking of biological speed, they brought up the epigenetic clock. This sounds less like a metaphor and more like a real thing.
Oh, it's a very real biomarker. Think of it like the odometer on your car, but for your cells.
Yeah.
As you age, your DNA gets these little chemical tags on it, methylation marks.
Okay.
And you can literally read those tags to see how old a person is biologically, no matter what their birthday is.
And Harden found a link between early puberty and this clock just ticking faster.
She did. It suggests there's a trade-off. If your body rushes toward reproductive maturity, so early or fast puberty, it's basically hitting the gas pedal on cellular aging.
Well,
You get to adulthood quicker, but you're also accumulating that cellular wear and tear faster, which is statistically linked to earlier mortality.
that is a staggering trade-off. It's like your body's deciding, okay, we need to reproduce now, so we're just going to borrow some time from the end of your life to pay for it.
That's a great way to put it. And this all connects to the father absence theory, which is, it's often really misunderstood.
Right, this is the observation that girls who grow up without their biological dad in the house tend to hit puberty earlier, and the old thinking was purely environmental.
Yeah, that the stress of it or the instability signals to the girl's body, hey, the world is unsafe, you need to grow up fast.
Which is a compelling story.
It is,
Yeah.
but Harden points out we can't ignore the genetics. This is a perfect example of what's called gene-environment correlation.
Which is the idea that our genes actually help create our environment.
Precisely. So if a mother has genes that predispose her to early puberty, she passes those to her daughter. But those same genes might also be linked to traits like, say, impulsivity, which can make it harder to maintain stable relationships.
So the daughter isn't just reacting to the environment. She's inheriting the genetic timeline and living in the world that those same genetics help to shape.
You can't cleanly pull the nature and the nurture apart.
Which leads us perfectly into our second big topic. If genes and environment are so tangled, how do we make sense of bad behavior? We have to talk about the bad seed.
Or, as Huberman frames it, the biology of sin. He asks, is there a specific spot in the brain, like the hypothalamus, that triggers the 7 deadly sins, lust, wrath, all that?
And Harden just shuts that down. It's not one spot, and it's definitely not one gene. It's polygenic.
Yeah, think of it less like a single light switch and more like a whole orchestra. A symphony doesn't get its volume from one giant drum. It comes from hundreds of instruments playing together. Polygenic means behavior is influenced by thousands of tiny genetic variants, each with a minuscule effect, but they all add up to a loud result.
And what's so fascinating is the overlap. The sort of sheet music for these behaviors is remarkably similar.
It is. The genetic variants that predispose someone to substance abuse are largely the same ones that predispose them to risky sexual behavior and impulsive aggression.
So in the eyes of genetics, sex, drugs, and violence are all just different flavors of the same ice cream.
They're all manifestations of disinhibition. And Harden explains that these specific genes are highly active during fetal development,
Right.
specifically the second and third trimesters. They're wiring the brain's control board. Some brains just get wired with a very sensitive brake pedal. Others get wired with a gas pedal that's kind of stuck to the floor.
She calls this the neurodevelopmental model of behavior. We accept that ADHD or autism are wiring issues from the womb. She's arguing we need to view things like conduct disorders and addiction the exact same way.
Which is a really hard pill for society to swallow because we moralize those behaviors so heavily. But if your brain is wired for high sensation seeking, that drive for intensity and high disinhibition, the inability to stop, you are, well, chemically primed for trouble. But, and this is my favorite part of this whole discussion, that trouble isn't always criminal.
No, context is everything.
This is the entrepreneur paradox.
Right, so you take a person with high sensation seeking, high risk tolerance, low impulse control, and you put them in a poor, unstable environment. They might rob a liquor store.
Okay.
But you take that exact same person with the exact same genetic wiring, and you give them a safety net, a good education, access to capital.
They start a tech company.
They start a tech company. They become disruptors. They bet the farm on some crazy idea. They ignore the rules. And we celebrate them as visionaries. But biologically, they're running on the same engine as the person we lock up.
That just completely blurs the line between a gift and a curse. It suggests the difference between a CEO and a convict isn't their nature, but where their nature was allowed to play out.
And that realization creates a lot of cognitive dissonance for us, which brings us to the rescue blame trap. Let's go back to Charles Whitman and his tumor. We said society breathed this sigh of relief when they found it. Why? Because it let us all off the hook.
Right. It let us maintain this illusion that normal people are good and safe. Whitman just had mechanical failure. We could rescue his memory because he was a victim of his biology.
But Harden argues we can't do that with genes. If I say, oh, it wasn't me, it was my genes, people just roll their eyes.
Because genes feel essential. They feel like the blueprint of you. We can imagine Charles Whitman without his tumor. We can't imagine a person without their genome.
So we get stuck. We get stuck in this trap. We want to hold people accountable. That's the blame part. But when we see the bad luck of their biology and their environment, we want to help. That's the rescue.
And it's agonizing. Harden talks about a letter she got from a prisoner who'd been locked up since he was a teenager. And he asked her just so simply, was I born bad?
A haunting question.
It is. And Harden's stance is that no one is born bad in some, predestined religious way. But she's honest enough to say that some people are born with a much, much heavier backpack. They just draw the short straw on genetics and on environment.
But she doesn't leave it there. That's just hopeless. She quotes Andrew Solomon, who said, parents don't reproduce, they produce.
I think that's one of the most important takeaways from all of this. You are not a clone of your parents. You are a genetic recombination, a whole new roll of the dice. You inherit risk, for sure, but you are a new production. The script is not fully written at birth.
But for those who do end up breaking the social contract, whether it's biology or bad luck or both, we have to talk about how we treat them. And this brings us to the final piece, the cruelty currency.
This is where the science gets really uncomfortable for us as a society. Harden points out that scientifically, harsh punishment is just not an effective tool for behavior change.
Which seems so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
If you burn your hand on the stove, you don't touch the stove again.
That works for simple reflexes. But for complex social behaviors, especially in people with that disinhibition wiring we talked about, punishment doesn't teach a new behavior. Reward and reinforcement are just vastly more effective in rats, in dogs, in humans.
So if it doesn't really work to fix the person, why are we so obsessed with it? I mean, just look at social media or our prison system. We love a good takedown.
We do, and it's because we are paying with the cruelty currency. This goes back to Nietzsche. We see the suffering of the wrongdoer as a form of payment. You hurt the tribe, you create a debt. The only way to balance the books is for you to suffer.
And Huberman points out this isn't just philosophy, it's neurochemistry.
Yes. When we see a norm violator getting punished, our brain releases dopamine. We get a chemical reward. It literally feels good to see the bad guy go down. It satisfies this deep evolutionary craving for fairness.
There was a study they talked about that illustrates this perfectly, the village experiment. I want to dig into this because the results were so telling.
This was a brilliant setup. So imagine two online communities. In Village A, everyone can contribute to a pot, but there's no way to punish anyone. If someone's a freeloader and doesn't contribute, you have to live with it.
Okay, and Village B?
In Village B, you can punish the freeloaders, but, and here's the catch, you have to pay your own real money to do it. You have to take a personal loss to make sure the other person suffers.
So logic would say everyone chooses Village A. Why would I want to live somewhere I have to pay to police other people?
That's what you'd think. But Village A collapsed. The cooperators, the people trying to do the right thing, they just stopped contributing because they felt like suckers. They felt exploited.
And Village B?
It thrived. People moved to Village B in droves. They were happy to pay for the privilege of punishment because it ensured a baseline of fairness. It proves we care more about fairness than we do about maximizing our own profit.
That explains so much about, about the internet. Cancel culture, public shaming. It's not just noise. It's us trying to recreate Village B in a digital world where we can't physically enforce the norms.
Paul Bloom, another psychologist, he argues humans don't actually mind inequality that much. We don't mind that some people have more. We mind unfairness. We hate seeing someone get a reward they didn't earn, and our biology drives us to correct that, even if it's cruel.
So where does that leave us? I mean, we've got a brain wired by genes we didn't choose, shaped by a puberty timeline we couldn't control, and driven by a chemistry that loves to punish. It really feels like a trap.
It is a trap, unless we change the whole framework. Harden suggests moving from backward-looking justice to forward-looking justice.
And backward-looking is the cruelty currency, making you pay for what you did.
Right. Forward-looking justice is just pragmatic. It asks, okay, this harm happened. What do we do now to make sure it doesn't happen again? It's focused on safety and prevention, not the moral satisfaction of inflicting pain.
It's the difference between beating a dog for peeing on the rug versus realizing the dog has a bladder infection and just treating it.
Or realizing the dog just wasn't trained. It challenges that glee we feel in punishment. Doesn't mean we let dangerous people roam. Free safety is non-negotiable, but it removes the moral superiority. We stop seeing the criminal as evil and start seeing them as a broken part of the system that needs to be contained or fixed.
It's a huge shift. And before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with that final thought experiment Harden proposed. It's the ultimate what if.
The IVF scenario.
Right. Imagine we get to a point where we can screen embryos with perfect accuracy. We can identify those polygenic scores for risk-taking, impulsivity, aggression, and we decide, as a society, to just scrub them. We select for zero antisocial risk.
We would almost certainly eliminate violent crime. Our prisons would be empty. Domestic violence would probably vanish.
What?
But we'd also likely eliminate the explorers, the astronauts who sit on top of a rocket, the entrepreneurs who bankrupt themselves 3 times before they change the world, the artists who live on the edge.
Because the genes are the same.
The engine is the same. It's just steered in a different direction. If we flatten the curve of bad behavior, we might also flatten the curve of human exceptionalism.
A safe world, but maybe a stagnant one. It's a hell of a thing to chew on.
Sometimes the things that make us most dangerous are the very things that make us human.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
See you next time.